Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Monterey's Magical History Tour. Today is a program that is near and dear to my heart. And I have two of my favorite Monterey people as my guests, people I've known for a number of years now. I have John and Carol O'Neill, who are both associated with the Point Sur Lightstation. Carol actually is the historian down there. And I've had a connection with Point Sur and the light station for actually a number of years as well. Not as close as those guys, but I have when I was the museum historian and curator for the Monterey Maritime Museum. Many of you remember that we had the lens from Point Sur, the Fresnel lens of the first order, which is the largest of the lighthouse lenses. That was sort of the shining light, shining exhibit in our museum. In fact, the museum on the waterfront was built around that lens. And so I talked about that lens every day for about 16 years to a lot of kids and a lot of folks who came into the museum. And I used to love to talk about it. And then I had the opportunity to interview some folks who grew up at Point Sur Light Station. And so it was always been a real connection to me then. And then after just last, I guess it was about 2 years ago, I signed up to be an actual docent down there. And I wasn't sure how that was going to work out for me, but it turned out to be a really fun thing. And it turns out to be one of the happier moments of my month is when I go down and be a docent at Point Sur Light Station. So I'm going to introduce you to John and Carol O'Neill. John, you are the president, right, of Central Coast Lighthouse Keepers?
That's right, Tim. We're the nonprofit that supports the activities at Point Sur.
And how long you guys
generated at the park stays at the park to do the restoration.
And when did you guys first get involved with Point Sur?
We moved back here from the East Coast in '93, and I had often volunteered at various places around the world, actually, with John's Marine Corps career. And I saw an ad in the paper for Point Sur, and I had given tours for Historic Annapolis in Maryland, and thought, oh, that looks sort of interesting, but way more daunting than an historic house, but it was way more fun. So yeah, John came down for our first tour, and they just sucked us both right in.
Very good. And so I know you might get into this in part of your presentation, but why Point Sur? Why did they put the light there?
Well, it sticks out into the ocean, and it's actually an aid to navigation. So the light signifies a mark where a ship going up or down the coast would make a change in its navigation.
And so what is the difference between Point Sur Light Station and the lighthouse in Pacific Grove?
Well, a lighthouse is the building that holds the light, the aid to navigation, and a light station is the all of the support buildings, including the lighthouse. And actually, Point Pinos had a lighthouse or light station also. It had some keeper quarters there that belonged to the Coast Guard, may still belong to the Coast Guard, a couple of them. So
and then before we go into your presentation, when can people take tours down there?
Well, right now there are fewer tours per week than we would like, but that is a direct reflection of how many volunteers we have to actually staff the tours. So right now we have 3-hour walking tours at 10 o'clock on Saturdays and 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesdays.
Very good. And the cost for that?
$15 for adults and $5 for children 6 through 17.
And of course, there's no reservation, so it's first come, first serve kind of thing.
First come, first serve. We don't have the ability to take reservations, and because of the people often get hung up on the highway. So if we took reservations and people were late and they'd already paid, then we have problems. So it's first come, first serve. We're all volunteers. We try to keep it simple.
And I was surprised because the last two tours I done were on Wednesday afternoon. In fact, I was there last Wednesday, and I figured Wednesday in the middle of October, there's not going to be anybody there. We were full up because we only can
Oh,
take
wow.
40 people, right? I was surprised. All right,
Well,
so
there
we're
are
gonna.
worse places to be on a Wednesday
Yeah, well,
afternoon.
it is a beautiful place, and luckily that day there was no wind. It was a beautiful sunny day, so that was really nice. All right, so Carol, you have a presentation. If you can.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'm actually hopefully introducing people to one of my favorite places, and that's the Point Sur Lightstation. And you can see it way in the background. Whoops. There in the fog. And as you get closer, rounding Hurricane Point, you see it in the distance. It looks like an island, but it's attached to the land by the sand spit there. And there it is on a sunny day. It's different almost every day. We drive out a road to the lighthouse. The parking is at the base. And then the walking tour goes up the road that winds around the left side of the rock there. And that is essentially the light station. These are all the buildings at the top of the rock, everything but the lighthouse. And there is the lighthouse perched on the northwest part of the rock. It actually is not at the top of the rock because of the fog. They built it so it would be below the normal summer fogs. And it's also on a part of the rock that gives us the best sweep of ocean, north and south of the light. And this shows you where it is. There's Monterey, and I apologize, I don't have a pointer, and I seem to have lost my, oh, there it is. So there's Monterey. There is Point Sur down the coast, sticks out right there. Highway 1 goes right by. And you can see where it's a ship coming up the coast would have to make a turn there. Going back in history, the early explorers called it a point that appears as an island, and sometimes the area here would flood. But this is an early 1850s drawing from a map of the California coast, and you can see it looks like an island. This is actually by the same artist, that a watercolor of the rock before the top was leveled off at the top to place all the buildings, 1859. This is an early pre-1900 photo, and what's interesting about it is that there's no road to the top. Originally, they built a tramway that went up to the top, across the top, and down the bottom, down the other side, and out to the lighthouse. So there were no roads actually at Point Sur. And another interesting thing is here is the track, and eventually it went into a corduroy road. And a corduroy road is sort of like a boardwalk. It's boards or split logs with stringers underneath, and they needed to put down something so the wagons could get across the sand flats. This is one of my 4 favorite photos. It's from 1889. It's when they were building the lighthouse. The light was turned on in 1889, so this is a very early shot. And some of my favorite things here, it's got great little notations: fog passing along the hills, and that, I guess, is the all the gray up here. Corduroy Road right here, there's a little arrow. We wondered about this. This is a pumping station, so they had built a little well on the sand flats. And here is the barn that they built at the bottom. because of course with no road that they weren't going to get their horse or mules to the top. And speaking of mules, there's the barn. Mules, there was a buggy, and here is your corduroy road going right past it. If you've been to Point Sur, the parking lot is actually over here. This was, and the road to the top now goes behind where this was located. So here's another one of those 1889 photos. Here is the car that goes, this is across the top. These are two of the buildings. This is the large building, the triplex. There were 3 apartments in this building. And over here was the original hoist house. In 1900, when they built the road to the top, they put a second story on that particular building and turned it into the head keeper's house. So this is one of the few photos we have of the hoist railway. Also notice how sort of narrow it is in this area. In 1900, they built a road to the top because one of the things they discovered is that tramway looked great on paper, but it required a lot of maintenance. They had steel cables, which were a fairly new invention in 1889, and they were using the steel cables to hoist the cars up and down, and the cables were wearing through the redwood railroad ties. So it just wasn't working very well for them. So they decided to go to the extra expense of building a road. So here are the early road builders. Charlie Bixby from Bixby Creek and the Post brothers from Post Ranch were some of the builders. Bixby was actually the contractor on this particular building. Here is the road as an early picture of it, and you'll notice how wide it is, and that is not very. The road went up, it's the same road we go on today. It's been widened a few times, but you'll notice they just left the old tramway right to deteriorate in place. That was, excuse me. Yeah, that was 1900, they put that in. In 1907, in April, there was a slip of the roadway or of the rock. And what we think happened is when they leveled off the top of the rock to build these buildings, they just threw the detritus over the side. And at some point it just collapsed. Some interesting things here, aside from the man holding the child, is the two-hole privy and a cooler where they would have kept their food, and how close this came to the actual building. 1907. There's constant problem with things falling on the rock, off the rock. It is a rock, but it is crumbly. And 1930s, we have a great photo of a very large rock that fell down near the lighthouse. And in the 1940s, here, this photo, it looks like they are blowing up something that blocked the roadway. Excuse me. Before the highway went into Big Sur, and that didn't go as far as Big Sur until 1932, the rock was supplied 3 times a year by light station tenders. And here is a tender. It would come anchor outside the kelp. All of the supplies that they were delivering would be put into these small boats, brought over to a landing, and brought up via cargo net, which you can see here on this photo. They're actually unloading lumber. So it was dangerous. A couple of sailors died in 1932 when their small boat went upended. And after that, they decided it was much safer to bring things by truck down the highway. The other interesting thing is when the light station tender would come, it would also bring the dreaded inspector. And I don't know how often he came, maybe once a year. Here are some other photos of the landing. It was about 40 feet off the water. These still exist, some of these concrete abutments. And you'll notice that there is a tramway, and the tramway went straight up over the road to the top of the rock. And here's some great photos. You can see how steep it was. And this was just a simple hoist railway. It was powered by a steam donkey, which is essentially just a steam engine at the top of the rock. And there it is at the top of the rock. And I've heard a couple different ways. Steam donkey because it replaced a donkey. It was less than a horsepower. I'm not sure anyone has the exact why it's called a steam donkey, but there it is. This is Keeper Henderson in the mid-30s, standing under the very steep tram tracks. And out at the lighthouse, which is not at the top of the rock, as I showed you in the beginning, they had some things to note here. Is they had a Fresnel lens, and we know how early this was because it's a steam fog whistle. So this was before 1908, and there is all sorts of wood stacked up because to run the steam fog whistle, originally they had to run it by burning wood, essentially. And it took sometimes 110 cords of wood a year to run the fog whistle. Here is a great photo. This is the wood being delivered. Was sourced locally in Big Sur by Mr. Geschwin, a Swiss emigre. And I love this photo because there's a little girl standing on top of the wood that has just been delivered. And of course, the outhouse. The outhouse foundation is still there. Some of the land has worn away, but it's a great thing on tours to ask the kids if they know what the concrete base with the hole in it, what it does. Inside the lighthouse is the fog signal room, and here is early equipment that ran the fog signal. By 1908, they were experimenting with a compressed air system, and it worked so well that they ended the experiment and just kept the the compressed air to run the fog whistle. And this is an early system for that, and these are leather belts that run these giant compressors. And I don't know if it was this equipment, probably some later equipment. I interviewed a woman who was a 4-year-old around 1930 or so, and she remembers her father putting her on the belts and being very proud that he could get the machinery to go slow enough to give his little daughter a ride. So the first time she told me, I envisioned her flying off the end of the equipment, but she when I interviewed her a second time, she said, oh no, he was very proud of being able to get it to slow down. When they introduced the compressed air, they had to bring in some more oil fuel. So here is the oil house they built kind of around, I'll say the corner, but in another niche carved out of the rock. And what made this an interesting building, because it's really not much of a building, is that it was when they just were starting to realize that if they kept their fuel, which is flammable, separate from their lighthouse, it was way safer. So they kept the bulk of their fuel, which was in these big tanks. It was safer all around in case there was some sort of large fire. What was interesting, we had this picture and we didn't know, gosh, did they roll the big tanks up to the top and put the tanks inside via the roof, or how did that work? Well, one of our volunteers got inside this building and found that they had actually built the building, and then they had carved out right here a half circle. So I think it was sort of like building a boat in your basement. They built the building and then discovered they couldn't get the actual fuel tanks in. But in their defense, I believe originally they had delivered the fuel in 5-gallon or 10-gallon cans. So here we move forward with the lighthouse, and it changed a little over the years. In the 1930s, it was painted white. Here's the compressed air tanks. You see down here, more compressed air tanks, different fog signals up here. The lighthouse is not painted in this photo. Here is the Fresnel lens in place. We try to date the lighthouse by these small details. You'll notice that in this photo, the Fresnel lens is shining. It's not turned on, but shining proudly. And in the other photos, there are either shades or curtains in the windows. And early on, they had shades. Then they moved to curtains, and they did that to protect the lens. They also were worried about fire because the Fresnel lens magnifies or concentrates the light, which is inside the lens, going out, but it can also concentrate the sunlight coming in, and was potentially a source of fire if the sunlight came in and hit the wick or whatever inside the lens. Things were going on at the lighthouse or at the light station at the top in the 1940s during the war. Several, and we don't know how many, sailors were stationed at the top of Point Sur. They were doing experiments. There were also, of course, people watching for enemy ships. Here is a photo of a sailor on watch. This is the Raycon tower. Raycon predated radar, and it was something that was being experimented at Point Sur. And Point Sur had a lot of things going for it as far as a great place for maritime experiments. It was remote. It stuck out into the ocean, and it had interesting ocean currents, ocean bottoms, and it continued to be a place of experimentation right up into the Cold War. Of course, every lighthouse in the old days had to have lighthouse keepers, and here is a great photo of the early keepers, some of whom we know who they are. This is Mr. and Mrs. Church. Their daughter gave us this photo. They met in the Philippines. He was an American firefighter, and she had gone to the Philippines with her parents. And they got married there and ended up, he got a good civil service job at Point Sur. It didn't stay too long. They ended up back in Missouri, where he either got a job or her parents had moved. We don't know who this guy is, but he sure has a great mustache. And here they are again, Mr. and Mrs. Church, the guy with the great mustache. This is our headkeeper's house now. This is about 1913. This is Mrs. Church, Elsie Church. This is head keeper John Astrom. He was a Norwegian emigre, or maybe I think he was Swedish actually. Had been in the Swedish Navy for 20 years and then been shipwrecked, had all kinds of great stories. And then when he retired from that, he became an American lighthouse keeper. And here is the guy with the great mustache. Still don't know who he is. And Mrs. Astrom, Alice. Here are the Astroms again. It's the first photo we have inside the head keeper's house, and some of the really great details we've gotten is they still have the concrete floor because this was the hoist house before they put the second floor on it. John and Alice Astrom are buried in the Monterey City Cemetery, and their son John unfortunately died of tuberculosis consumption when he was about 21. We have a very sad, to me, sad letter from the director of the public health hospital telling Keeper Astrom that his son does not rate going into that hospital because his son is not an employee of the lighthouse service. Only the keeper would be able to get that hospital services. In the late 1920s, in the county of Monterey, if you had 6 children of school age, you could get your very own teacher. So it's interesting, these 2 little kids from different families. This is Elvina Frazier, and she was 4. And this is Billy Mollering, and he was 5. And they both families credit their kids with getting the teacher. They were both underage, but apparently, as the stories get passed down, it's okay. They both claim getting the teacher, but for a couple of years, 2-3 years, Point Sur had its very own little school up at the top of the rock, and this is Miss Young. We have several photos of the kids in costume. They put on a lot of plays. This happens to be, I believe, Hansel and Gretel. And there is Billy Mollering. And this is Elvina's younger brother, Bobby. So he was probably only 3 years old at the time. They incorporate all the kids on the rock. That is the station horse, Prince. Prince was a doped racehorse. So wasn't able to, well, he was probably able, he wasn't allowed to run again. So they got him at a bargain. And all the kids that we have met had very fond memories of Prince being a very patient horse. Kids, 1930, 1940, they're doing the same thing, a lot of imaginary play. Here is the Point Sur Hospital. So here are our little nurses, here are our patients, and here we are in 1940. The patient by 1940, of course, is a real baby, not a doll. They sometimes had a cow. This is Beauty the cow and Keeper Henderson. There is a story that I have somewhat confirmed through various interviewing a couple of people, the Hendersons' son and another keeper's child, that one of the keepers complained about the cow, and Keeper Henderson said, if you don't like it, you don't have to have her milk. Apparently he was selling milk to the other keepers, so that other keeper started buying milk from some other dairy and would walk the mile or so down to the road and get his milk every day. And when I brought that up to the children of these keepers, The first thing I got is, oh, that's ridiculous. And then the second time it's like, well, maybe that happened. I can see that happening. So yeah, it was a small town. There were 4 keepers and their families, and these things happen. Here is George Henderson, Keeper Henderson's son, in his Monterey High band uniform. They took the bus into Monterey. This is in the mid-1930s. They started getting cars at Point Sur in the late 1920s. This photo at the top, that's a great bus, and how it made the turn there, I suspect they had to back up to get around. The bus would actually come up to the top of the rock and deliver people to the lighthouse. It looks to me as if there's a little bit more land here. It may have fallen away over the years. I just don't know. And here is a wonderful old car, a couple of old cars. We're actually using this photo because we're restoring this porch, and it's one of the few photos we have of that particular porch. Recreation at the rock, of course, there was fishing. Interestingly, here are the 2 guys that were arguing over the cow, Keeper Owens and Keeper Henderson. And I asked the lady Alvina Frazier, her father was a keeper, and she gave us this photo, and I asked her about it, and she said that's the flagpole at Point Sur. But she said, oh, I think there was a bit of alcohol involved that day. So here are the keepers in the late 1930s. Most people enjoyed being at the lighthouse. Not everyone. There were, of course, small squabbles and whatnot, but in general, it was a beautiful place. The kids had the run of the rock and down on the sand flats, and mostly people seemed to get along. And here are the keepers in the late 1930s, looking very spiffy in their lighthouse service uniforms. This must be the middle 30s, because actually the lighthouse service was incorporated into the Coast Guard in 1939. Now, if you go on a tour at Point Sur, there is, in my estimation, no more beautiful place to look at Big Sur than from Point Sur. But Point Sur has its own charms. People park in the parking lot at the base of the rock. They walk up the roadway slowly, because we stop and talk. Then they get on the flat and walk out to the lighthouse. And there's the lighthouse looking all proud. Up the stairs and down the stairs. You get to stand out on the gallery, which is wonderful on a calm day. Go into the fog signal room and see the displays there. And then up the stairs, 61 steps, to a trail that puts you on the same level as the lantern, so you can see the light up the trail. And then to the rest of the light station buildings. There's a barn, carpenter blacksmith shop, 2 keeper houses, and a visitor center. And there is the barn and the carpenter blacksmith shop. Our restored head keeper's house. Here is the light station. From the, there's a communications tower there, and when one of the Coast Guard had hired somebody to come and do some maintenance, and one of our volunteers gave him his camera and asked the guy to take a picture. So that's how we got this picture. No drones. So that was at Point Sur. Then there's from Point Sur, and this is one of my favorite things, is what it looks like at the top of the rock and all around. No better place. You can see out here, this is Santa Cruz. On a clear day, you can see Santa Cruz. And that's looking south. We have incredible weather. The fog comes and goes and surrounds us and piles up on the rock. Sometimes it's below us. Sometimes it just rolls in. Sometimes the rock gets in the way of it. There's another rolling fog bank. This particular day, it was blowing from the north to the south, and the rock was actually causing a wake in the fog. And then some days it just comes over the rock like a blanket. And then, of course, the sun comes out. And sometimes you can get lucky and see a rainbow from the rock. We see wonderful sea life there, often sea lions, otters, birds. We have pelicans, a peregrine falcon, of course, turkey vultures. One day, one of our volunteers got this photo of all these condors, and they were massed on the top of the rock because there was a dead whale down on the beach. We have moonlight tours, and the sun on a moonlight tour as it sinks into the ocean is just incredible. It's very magical up there for a moonlight tour. Even our rangers like to watch the sunset. And then the moon rises. They're called moonlight tours because we have them during when there's a full moon. So you're seeing the moon rise above the mountains opposite Point Sur. Some years we do whale watching tours, have binoculars and spotting scopes set up, and there is no better place to watch whales without getting seasick than Point Sur. We are just getting set up we're reinstituting our Halloween tours. We haven't been able to give them for several years. Excuse me. And we have several spooky things that happen during our Halloween tours. Some photos of our Halloween tours. We have pirates and skeletons and ghosts and wonderful things. In August, we celebrate our anniversary with a Living History Day, where people can come and wander around. There are no tours. They get a ride to the top, and we have volunteers in costumes. Sometimes they're in the 1950s, Coast Guard era. Sometimes they're turn of the century. Lots of fun. In a good weather year with a lot of rain, we have wonderful wildflowers and occasionally have done wildflower tours. You can book a personal or special tour. Have your group. We've had birthday parties. We've had class trips. All kinds of things, reunions, proposals. People love to book a special tour for a proposal. And of course, the best part for me, aside, even better than the view at Point Sur, are the volunteers. And there they are. We have Preservation Day volunteers. They were painting that fence. We spend a lot of time at those fences looking out to sea, because sometimes there are whales, sometimes there are birds, sometimes it's just a convenient place to lean your elbows. Everybody seems to do it. The Highway Patrol came up one day. They had a class on riding your motorcycle, and they came in the gate and roared up to the top of the rock, and they too ended up all standing at the fence looking out to sea. Here is a view of the lighthouse from the ocean. One of our volunteers is a marine biologist and gave us this shot. We also, John alluded to our nonprofit and the money that you pay when you take a tour has gone to restoring the lighthouse. And here are some of the ways we have spent that money. That's our carpenter blacksmith shop. This is the head keeper's house that was the hoist house. On the other side of it, the inside, the kitchen. But we have the historic 1950 kitchen, how State Parks had it in 1999, and after it was restored. And we restored it to 1950, so you can see that we have tried to replicate that. The rock itself, aside from more vegetation and slightly higher dunes, it's pretty much the same. The rock itself is very much the same. The Fresnel lens, there it was in the Maritime Museum when Tim knew it best, and historically in place in the lighthouse. In 2017, in December of 2017, the Central Coast Lighthouse Keepers paid to have it dismantled, taken apart, and State Parks has it ready to be repatriated back into the tower at Point Sur. And the thing that is so wonderful about this is the Coast Guard owns this lens. They generally want them to go to museums, and we were able to convince the Coast Guard curator that the best place for this lens was back in the tower at Point Sur, and that we would make it a safe environment for the lens because it's a precious artifact. So here are more photos. That's a heavy, heavy piece of equipment, I have to say. And here is, if you want to help Point Sur, here are different ways. Take a tour, make a donation, volunteer, of course, join our nonprofit, contribute to our endowment, buy something in the gift shop, tell your friends, and come over and over again because every tour is different. For locals who remember Bill Bates, who did cartoons, I think his cartoons are still running in the Carmel Pinecone. He did this cartoon for us several years ago, and it reflects what we hear over and over again from the locals. Wish I had taken that Point Sur Lightstation tour. And that is the end of this presentation, at least the video. So do I stop stream? Thanks, Tim.
That was great. And so I should
Okay.
Just quickly mention why the Maritime Museum actually had that lens to begin with, because as I understood, and I went to work for the Maritime Museum in 1992, right after they opened at the waterfront down there, and as it was explained to me, that when the Coast Guard essentially abandoned that light station, there was nobody there, and that people would climb over the fence and go up to the rock, and they would kind of play around with that lens. They were throwing rocks at it and things, and there was a great concern about it. And the Maritime Museum worked with the Coast Guard. At that time, they didn't have to go through the curator because it wasn't considered to be an historic artifact then. And so they were able to take it down, and in pieces, it comes apart. It's actually numbered like a puzzle. And then they took it apart and cleaned it, and we put it in the old Maritime Museum, where it actually set on the floor. And then when we built the new museum on the waterfront, they built around for that lens. So when it was announced that they were going to close the Maritime Museum, I was brought in to find homes for the collection. And that was the first thing I thought of, was that lens. And I contacted you guys, and I also contacted the Coast Guard at that time. And then you guys arranged that meeting, and because I was at that meeting at Point Sur. And I was also so surprised when she said, yes, it should go right back. That was a good day for all, right?
It was a good day.
So I know it's an expensive process, but I think it'll be well worth it once it goes back in there.
It will be awesome to come down the trail and be able to look into the lantern and see the Fresnel lens.
So I know we're going to run out of time here, so I'm going to I know part of the light station, of course, people talk about or shipwrecks. We won't do that today, but perhaps at another program we could talk about shipwrecks along the coast. The Macon in particular is a story I got a lot at the Maritime Museum. And those
Yeah.
of you out there in the world who don't know about the Macon, it was a large, almost 800-foot flying aircraft carrier that crashed right off of Point Sur in 1935, and it's a pretty remarkable story, actually. But I think we could say that we could spend a whole hour on that in
Yeah,
itself.
I was gonna say there, you can't do that in a couple minutes.
No, you can't. And then, John, I also want to do another program just about the NAVFAC buildings and what was going on down there. You know, I think
I
I've told
think that's pretty interesting too.
yeah, 'cause that's an old relic of the Cold War, and it hits home to me because my father was a highway patrolman, and his route was Carmel to Big Sur, and this was starting in the late 1950s into the early 60s, and he used to go in there all the time. He knew the guys who were there, and you know, but he never knew what they actually did there. I mean, so to me, that's the kind of a cool thing. So we're beginning to find out with all the secrets that happen down there. So I appreciate you guys coming on today. It was a lot of fun. If there's anybody interested in being a volunteer, they just get in touch with Central Coast Light Housekeepers.
They can go on our website, cclk@pointsur.org. There's a link from the website, which is Point Sur spelled out, pointsur.org. They would send an email. I answer the emails and I send it on to our training chairman, who will give them all the information. John happens to be the training chairman. Because we all of us at the lighthouse, you know this, wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, yeah. So I should point out too that today's program has actually been recorded, and so you can watch it a later date. But we're also recording it a day before it's going. That you're seeing it now, and so if you have any questions about today, you can just email me at timsardine@yahoo.com. That's timsardine@yahoo.com. I think Sarah will put that in the chat there. And email me any questions you have about today's topic, or if you have any question about Monterey history, just send me an email, and if I can't answer it, I'll know somebody who does know the right answer. So again, thank you guys. I really appreciate coming on today.
Thanks, Tim, for having us.
Thank you, Tim.
You bet.